Counselor Thrixel had spent 3 long cycles studying humans before he agreed to visit their ship. He read their history files. He watched their communication broadcasts. He studied their biology reports. The Valoran High Council wanted him to meet these strange creatures and learn if they could be trusted as allies. Thrixel thought he understood them. Humans were a young species. They had only been traveling through space for about 200 years. Their bodies looked soft and weak. They lived short lives compared to most species in the galaxy. They seemed harmless enough. He was wrong about almost everything. The human ship was called the Starward Hope. It was a large vessel, bigger than most Valoran cruisers, with thick metal walls and bright lights in every corridor. Thrixel arrived at the docking bay with his assistant and 2 guards. He wore his finest diplomatic robes and carried himself with the dignity expected of a Valoran. Counselor Captain Lisa Monroe was waiting for him. She was a female human of average height, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes the color of deep water. She smiled when she saw him, showing her teeth in that strange way humans did when they were happy. "Welcome aboard, Counselor," she said. Her voice was warm and friendly. "We're honored to have you with us." She extended her hand toward him. Thrixel knew about this custom. It was called a handshake. Humans used it as a greeting between equals. He reached out with his own 4-fingered hand and allowed her to grip it. The pressure was immediate and shocking. Her fingers closed around his hand like a vice. He felt his bones compressed together. Pain shot up his arm. For a brief moment, he thought she was attacking him. Then she let go. "Sorry about that," Lisa said quickly. Her face showed concern. "I forget sometimes. Are you okay?" Thrixel flexed his fingers. Nothing was broken, but his hand ached. He looked at her face and saw only genuine worry. She had not meant to hurt him. She had simply squeezed his hand the way she would squeeze another human's hand. She had forgotten her own strength. His translator device struggled with this concept. How could someone forget how strong they were? Every Valoran knew exactly what their body could and could not do. They trained from childhood to understand their physical limits. "I am well," Thrixel said carefully. "Thank you for your concern." A young human male approached them. He had brown skin and a friendly smile, and he wore the uniform of an engineer. Captain Monroe introduced him as Lieutenant Danny Vega. "I can take your trunk to your quarters, sir," Danny said, pointing at the large ceremonial case that Thrixel's guards had carried from the shuttle. The trunk contained gifts for the human captain, sacred items from Valoran, and Thrixel's personal supplies. It weighed approximately 40 kelix. On Valoran, it took 3 strong laborers to carry it any distance. Before Thrixel could explain this, Danny walked over to the trunk. He bent down, grabbed the handle with one hand, and lifted it off the ground. He tucked it against his hip like it weighed nothing at all. "Which deck?" Danny asked casually. Thrixel could not speak. He stared at the young human holding his 40 kelix trunk with one arm. Danny did not look like a soldier or a laborer. He looked like an ordinary person. Yet he held a weight that would have strained 3 Valorans without any visible effort. "Deck 7, Captain Monroe said when Thrixel did not answer. "The ambassador suite." Danny nodded and walked away, carrying the trunk as easily as if it were a small bag. Thrixel's guards exchanged worried glances. They had seen what he had seen. They understood what it meant. Captain Monroe led Thrixel through the ship toward the meeting room where they would begin their diplomatic discussions. As they walked, Thrixel observed the humans around him. They moved through the corridors with casual confidence. Some of them carried heavy equipment. Others pushed large carts loaded with supplies. None of them seemed to struggle with the weight. They passed a training room with a large window. Inside, several humans were exercising. One female was lifting a metal bar with heavy weights on each end. She raised it above her head again and again, her face showing effort but not exhaustion. Another human was striking a bag filled with sand, hitting it so hard that it swung wildly on its chain. "Our crew likes to stay fit," Captain Monroe explained. "Long space voyages can be boring. Exercise helps pass the time." Thrixell nodded, but his mind was racing. These were not soldiers. They were ordinary crew members, engineers and pilots and cooks. And they were stronger than the best Valoran warriors he had ever seen. The meeting room was comfortable, with soft chairs and warm lighting. Captain Monroe offered him food and drink, and they began to discuss the possibility of an alliance between their peoples. She spoke of trade routes and cultural exchange and mutual defense. She was intelligent and thoughtful and seemed genuinely interested in peace, but Thrixell found it hard to focus on her words. He kept thinking about the handshake, about the trunk, about the weights in the training room. The Valoran High Council had sent him here because they believed humans were weak. They thought these young creatures needed protection and guidance from older, wiser species. They imagined humans would be grateful for Valoran friendship. Now, Thrixell wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. During a break in their discussions, he asked Captain Monroe about human biology. She answered his questions openly, seeming pleased by his curiosity. "We evolved on a planet with high gravity," she explained. "Our bodies are built to handle that constant pull. Our bones are dense. Our muscles are efficient. We can survive a lot of damage that would kill other species. And you can lift heavy objects," Thrixell said. Lisa laughed. "I guess so. We don't really think about it much. It's just normal for us." Normal. The word echoed in Thrixell's mind. Lifting weights that would crush a Valoran was normal to them. Gripping hands hard enough to break bones was normal. They did not even realize they were doing it. That night, alone in his quarters, Thrixell began writing his first report to the High Council. His hands still ached from the captain's handshake. His mind was full of questions and fears. He wrote, "The humans do not know their own strength. They move through their lives unaware of what their bodies can do. This is either a great blessing or a terrible curse. I do not yet know which." He stared at the words for a long time before sending the message. Then he lay down on his sleeping platform and tried to rest. Sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Danny Vega lifting that trunk with one hand. He saw the woman in the training room raising those weights above her head. He saw Captain Monroe's friendly smile as she crushed his fingers without meaning to. What had the Valoran High Council gotten him into? 3 days passed aboard the Starward Hope. Thrixell attended meetings with Captain Monroe and her officers. He ate meals in the dining hall with the crew. He walked through the corridors and observed the humans going about their daily work. He tried to act like everything was normal, but he could not stop watching them. Every day, he saw things that amazed and frightened him. He saw a cook carry a pot of boiling soup across the kitchen without gloves. Her hands red from the heat, but her face calm. He saw an engineer hold a sparking wire with his bare fingers while he repaired a broken panel. He saw crew members laugh and joke as they lifted crates that should have required machines to move. None of them seemed to think any of this was strange. On the third night, disaster struck. Thrixell was in his quarters, writing another report to the High Council when the ship shook violently. Alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed in the corridors. A voice came over the communication system, speaking in calm but urgent tones. "Hull breach in Section 7. Emergency teams report immediately. All non-essential personnel shelter in place." Section 7. That was near his quarters. Thrixell grabbed his emergency mask and ran into the corridor. He could feel the air pressure dropping. His ears hurt. His chest felt tight. Cold air rushed past him as the atmosphere bled out through the hole in the ship's wall. Other crew members were running too. Some headed toward the breach. Others headed away from it, toward the safe rooms deeper in the ship. Thrixel tried to follow the ones heading to safety, but the corridor split in two directions, and he did not know which way to go. The temperature was falling fast. Thrixel's species could not survive in cold like this. His body was already starting to shake. His fingers were going numb. He knew that if he did not find warmth soon, he would die. Then he saw her. Ensign Katie Park came running around the corner. She was young, with short black hair and determined eyes. She wore only her standard uniform. No pressure suit. No thermal gear. Nothing to protect her from the cold that was spreading through the ship. "This way!" She shouted at Thrixel. "Move!" She grabbed his arm and pulled him down the corridor. Her grip was strong, almost painful. She ran fast, practically dragging him along behind her. The cold air turned her breath into white clouds, but she did not slow down. They reached the breach. A hole the size of Thrixel's head had been punched through the outer wall. Beyond it, he could see the black emptiness of space. Stars glittered in the distance. The air was rushing out through the hole with a terrible, howling sound. The emergency bulkhead was supposed to seal automatically, but something had gone wrong. The heavy metal door was stuck halfway closed, leaving a gap too large to stop the air from escaping. Katie ran to the door. There was a manual crank on the wall beside it, designed for exactly this kind of emergency. The crank was supposed to be operated by a team of 3 people, working together to provide enough force to move the heavy door. Katie grabbed the crank along and started turning it. Thrixel watched in disbelief. The crank was meant for 3 humans. Katie was one small female, but she pulled on that handle with all her strength, her muscles straining, her face twisted with effort. The door began to move. Slowly at first, then faster as she found her rhythm. The cold was terrible now. Thrixel could barely feel his hands or feet. His vision was starting to blur. He knew he should help somehow, but his body would not obey him. He could only stand and watch. Katie's breath came in short, hard gasps. Her skin had turned pale from the cold. Her fingers on the crank were white, but she did not stop. She kept turning, kept pulling, kept fighting against the weight of that door. 40-7 seconds. That was how long it took her to close the bulkhead. Thrixel counted without meaning to. 47 seconds to do. A job meant for 3 people in conditions that should have killed her. The door sealed with a heavy clunk. The howling stopped. The air pressure began to stabilize. Katie let go of the crank and leaned against the wall. She was shaking badly. Her breath was ragged. But she was alive. The medical team arrived minutes later. Dr. Henry Liu rushed to Katie's side with thermal blankets and heating packs. He wrapped her up and scolded her at the same time. "What were you thinking?" he demanded. "You should have waited for backup. You could have died out here." Katie smiled weakly. "The ambassador would have died first. The Lorens can't handle the cold." She was right. Thrixel knew she was right. If she had waited for help, he would have frozen to death. She had saved his life by risking her own. Dr. Liu helped Katie to her feet and led her away toward the medical bay. As she passed Thrixel, she gave him a small nod. "Glad you're okay," she said softly. Then she was gone. Thrixel stood alone in the corridor for a long time. His body was warming up again, but his mind was frozen with shock. He kept seeing Katie's pale face as she cranked that door closed. He kept hearing the determination in her voice. Later, he found Captain Monroe in her office. She was reviewing reports about the accident. "A microasteroid," she explained. A tiny rock flying through space at incredible speed. It had punched through their shields and their hull like a bullet through paper. Is Ensign Park all right? Thrixell asked. She'll be fine, Monroe said. Some minor frostbite on her fingers. A little hypothermia. Nothing that won't heal. Thrixell stared at her. She survived that cold. She operated a mechanism designed for 3 people. She did all of this without any protection. Monroe nodded. Adrenaline, probably. Humans can do amazing things when we have to. Our bodies are capable of a lot more than we normally use. You do not know your limits, Thrixell said slowly. Not really, Monroe agreed. She smiled at him, as if this was not the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. That's kind of the point of us. We don't know what we can do until we have to do it. That night, Thrixell added to his report. His hands were still cold as he wrote. Today, a single human female operated emergency equipment meant for 3 people. She did this in temperatures that should have killed her. She did this without hesitation, without training for this specific situation, without knowing if it was possible. She simply did it because she had to. The humans call this adrenaline. They speak of it casually, as if it is normal. But I watched that woman fight against cold and physics and her own body's limits, and I saw something more than chemicals. I saw a species that refuses to accept what should be impossible. I am beginning to understand why they have spread so quickly through the stars. They do not know what cannot be done, so they do it anyway. He sent the message and sat in the darkness of his quarters for a long time, thinking about Katie Park and her white. Fingers on that crank dot the Valoran High Council had wanted to know if humans could be trusted as allies. Thrixell was beginning to think that was the wrong question. The right question was, what would happen if humanity ever became an enemy? After the accident, Thrixell began to ask questions. He told himself it was cultural research. He told himself he was simply doing his job as a diplomat. But the truth was simpler than that. He was afraid, and he needed to understand why. He started with Navigator Ben Cortez, a friendly man with a quick smile and a love of talking. Ben was happy to share stories about humanity. He seemed proud of his species in a quiet way. You want to know about human strength? Ben said. They were sitting in the observation deck, watching the stars drift past. Let me tell you about something called hysterical strength. Thrixell had not heard this term before. His translator offered no clear meaning. It happens when someone we love is in danger, Ben explained. Mothers have lifted ground vehicles off their children. Not machines or robots. Just regular people, with their bare hands, lifting things that should be impossible to move. Thrixell thought about this. The lawn vehicles were heavy, but human vehicles on their high-gravity world must be even heavier. How is this possible? Ben shrugged. Nobody really knows. Our muscles are stronger than we normally use them. Our brains put limits on us to keep us from hurting ourselves. But when someone we love is dying, those limits disappear. We become something more than what we usually are. And afterward? Afterward, we usually collapse. Sometimes we hurt ourselves badly. But in that moment, we can do things that should be impossible. Ben smiled. We don't know our own strength, Ambassador. We really don't. Thrixell spoke next with Chief Security Officer Maria Santos. She was a tall woman with dark eyes and scars on her hands. She moved like a predator, always aware of her surroundings, always ready for danger. But her voice was kind when she talked to him. You want to know what humans can survive? She asked. How much time do you have? She told him stories that made his blood run cold. She told him about humans who walked for days through frozen wastelands, their skin turning black from the cold, their bodies shutting down piece by piece. They kept walking anyway. Some of them survived. She told him about humans who floated in open water for weeks, drinking rain and eating raw fish, fighting off sharks with their bare hands. Their bodies were destroyed, but their minds refused to give up. She told him about soldiers who kept fighting with holes in their bodies that should have killed them instantly. They kept shooting, kept running, kept protecting their friends until the battle was over. Then they fell down and died. There was this one guy, Maria said, leaning back in her chair. He got a metal rod through his skull. Went right through his brain. You know what he did? Thrixell shook his head. He walked himself to the medical bay. He asked for help. He was awake and talking the whole time. Lived another 40 years after that. Thrixell felt sick. His species had a saying, "The prey that doesn't know it's prey is merely foolish." But humans were not prey. They were something else entirely. They were predators who had forgotten they were predators. Dr. Henry Liu gave him the scientific explanation. They met in the medical bay, surrounded by machines and medicines that seemed primitive compared to Valoran technology but worked well enough for human bodies. Our ancestors evolved on a death world, Henry said calmly. He spoke about terrible things in a gentle voice, like a teacher explaining simple facts to a child. Earth had high gravity, extreme temperatures, and predators everywhere. Everything wanted to kill us. So we evolved to survive. How did you survive? Thrixell asked. We became the most dangerous thing on the planet. Henry smiled slightly. Our bones are dense and hard to break. Our muscles can produce enormous force when needed. We can function through pain that would stop other creatures. We heal from injuries that would kill most species. But you seem so fragile. Henry laughed. We are fragile in some ways. We need air and water and food. We can die from diseases and accidents and old age. But we're also incredibly hard to kill when we decide not to die. And you don't know what you can do, Thrixell said. It was not a question. Not really. We've been civilized for so long that we've forgotten what our bodies were designed for. We build comfortable lives and avoid danger and never test our limits. Henry looked at him with those calm eyes. But when we have to, we remember. And then things get interesting. Thrixell spent the rest of that day in his quarters, reading everything he could find about human history. He read about their wars, which were terrible beyond anything the Valoran had ever experienced. He read about their disasters, where ordinary people became heroes. He read about their explorers, who walked into unknown dangers with nothing but courage and curiosity. He read about a human named Ernest Shackleton, who led his crew across frozen water and mountains to find help after their ship was crushed by ice. Every man survived. It should have been impossible. He read about humans who climbed their highest mountains with barely any equipment, their bodies failing in the thin air, their fingers turning black from cold. They kept climbing anyway. He read about humans who ran distances that should have stopped at their hearts. Their bodies broke down during these runs. They vomited and bled and cried. They kept running anyway. What kind of species did this to themselves? What kind of creature chose to suffer again and again, just to see what was possible? The answer came to him slowly, like a cold wind creeping through a crack in the wall. Humans did not know their limits because they kept pushing past them. Every time they found a boundary, they crossed it. Every time they discovered something they could not do, they found a way to do it anyway. They were not evolving through their genes anymore. They were evolving through their choices. Every generation pushed further than the last. Every individual tried to do more than they thought they could. And they did this without understanding what it meant. Captain Monroe found him in the observation deck that evening. She sat down beside him and looked out at the stars. Ben tells me you've been asking questions, she said. Learning about us. Yes, Thrixell admitted. I am trying to understand your species. Any luck? He thought about this for a long time before answering. I understand that you are dangerous. More dangerous than my people knew. More dangerous than you know yourselves. Monroe did not seem offended. She just nodded slowly. Maybe, We don't think about it much. That is what makes it frightening, Thrixel said softly. She looked at him then, and for a moment, he saw something old and wild in her eyes. Something that remembered being hunted. Something that had learned to hunt back. Then it was gone, and she was just a friendly captain again. Offering him a warm drink and asking about his day, Thrixel accepted the drink. He smiled and made polite conversation. But inside he was counting the days until he could return to Valoran space. He needed to warn the High Council. They needed to know what they were dealing with. Humans were not weak. Humans were not harmless. Humans were sleeping giants who had forgotten how to wake up. And Thrixel did not want to be nearby when they remembered. The attack came on the 7th day. Thrixel was eating breakfast in the dining hall when the alarms started screaming. The lights turned red. The calm voice of the ship's computer announced words that made his heart stop. Warning! Unknown vessels approaching. Weapons detected. All crew to battle stations. The humans around him moved fast. They abandoned their food and ran toward their assigned positions. There was fear in their eyes, but also something else. Something hard and ready. Captain Monroe's voice came over the communication system. All hands, prepare for possible boarding. Security teams to the airlocks. Non-combat personnel to the safe rooms. This is not a drill. Thrixel followed the other diplomats to the designated safe room deep in the center of the ship. It was a small space with thick walls and heavy doors. Screens on the wall showed security camera feeds from around the vessel. He watched as 3 small ships attached themselves to the stalwart Hope like parasites. He watched as cutting tools burned through the hull. He watched as the first attackers came through the holes. They were Cathari. Thrixel's blood turned to ice. The Cathari were known throughout the sector as the most brutal raiders in space. They stood 7 feet tall, with bodies covered in natural armor. Their chitin was harder than steel. Their claws could cut through metal like paper. Their eyes were black and empty, showing no mercy and no fear. A single Cathari warrior could kill an entire Valoran security team. The story said they could not be stopped by normal weapons. They felt no pain. They showed no mercy. They lived only to fight and kill. 12 of them had boarded the ship. Thrixel watched the screens and waited for the slaughter to begin. He felt sorry for the humans. They had been kind to him. They did not deserve to die like this. But the slaughter did not happen the way he expected. Private Jake Dunn was the first human to engage the enemy. He was young, barely into adulthood by human standards. He had a round face and nervous eyes. He looked like someone who should be studying in a school, not fighting alien warriors. A Cathari came around the corner and found Jake alone in the corridor. The creature was huge, its claws dripping with some dark liquid. It made a sound like grinding rocks and charged toward the young human. Jake did not run. He did not scream. He picked up a metal pipe from the floor and charged right back. The Cathari swung its claws. They caught Jake across the chest, cutting through his uniform and into his flesh. Blood sprayed across the wall. Jake stumbled. He looked down at the wounds on his chest. Then he looked up at the Cathari with something terrible in his eyes. He swung the pipe so hard that the creature's armored head cracked. The Cathari fell. Jake kept swinging. Again and again, he brought that pipe down on the alien's body. The chitin broke. The creature stopped moving. But Jake did not stop. When other humans arrived, they had to pull him away. His chest was torn open. Blood soaked his entire body. He should have been dead. He kept fighting for another 6 minutes before anyone realized how badly he was wounded. Maria Santos faced 3 Cathari at once in the engineering section. Thrixel watched on the screen as she fought them with a combination of weapons and bare hands. When one of them knocked the gun from her grip, she grabbed its arm and twisted. The chitin armor cracked. The arm broke with a sound like snapping wood. Maria was laughing. Actually laughing as she fought for her life against creatures that should have torn her apart. She broke 2 of them before the third retreated. Then she picked up her gun and went hunting for more. Danny Vega used a welding torch to blind one Cathari, then beat it to death with a wrench. Katie Park, still recovering from her frostbite, shot 2 of them from a maintenance shaft before they even knew she was there. Dr. Henry Liu defended the medical bay with a surgical laser, cutting through chitin with the same calm precision he used to cut through flesh. He hummed a soft tune while he worked, but it was Captain Lisa Monroe who ended the battle. The Cathari leader was the biggest one, a monster covered in scars from 100 battles. It had killed its way to the bridge, looking for the human commander. It found her waiting. They fought. Monroe was fast and smart, but the creature was stronger and armored. It caught her arm and squeezed. Thrixel heard the bone break through the screen speakers. Monroe did not scream. She did not fall. She looked at her broken arm, then looked at the Cathari leader, and she smiled. She tackled the creature. She wrapped her good arm around its neck and drove forward with her legs. They crashed through the emergency airlock door together, the force of the impact sending them both tumbling into the small chamber beyond. The impact should have killed her. The airlock door was solid metal. She hit it hard enough to dent the frame. Monroe stood up. She wiped the creature's blood from her face. She stepped back through the broken door and sealed the airlock behind her, trapping the injured Cathari leader inside. Then she pressed the emergency release. The outer door opened. The Cathari was pulled into space, still reaching for her with its claws. Monroe watched it die in the vacuum. Then she turned to her crew. "Status report," she said calmly. Her arm hung at a wrong angle. Her face was covered in blood and bruises, but her voice was steady. The battle had lasted 11 minutes. All 12 Cathari were dead. The humans had 3 serious injuries and 1 broken arm. "That was a close one," Danny said afterward, sitting in the medical bay while Henry treated his burns. Thrixel stared at him. Close? The humans had just defeated the most feared warriors in the sector through sheer physical violence, and they thought it was close? He found Jake Dunn in a recovery bed, his chest wrapped in bandages. The young man was awake and alert, asking when he could return to duty. "You should be dead," Thrixel said. He did not mean to say it out loud, but the words escaped before he could stop them. Jake looked confused. "Why? Your injuries. You fought for 6 minutes with wounds that should have killed you instantly." Jake shrugged, then winced at the pain. "Adrenaline, I guess. I just knew I couldn't stop. If I stopped, more of them would get through. So I didn't stop." He said it so simply, so casually, like choosing to ignore fatal wounds was something anyone could do. Thrixel left the medical bay and walked to the observation deck. He needed to be alone. He needed to think. The stars looked different now. The galaxy felt smaller, more dangerous. He had always known there were threats out there, but he had never imagined the greatest threat might be humanity itself. They were not soldiers. They were engineers and doctors and navigators. They were young people and old people. They were soft-looking creatures with short lives and fragile bodies, and they had just destroyed 12 Cathari warriors like it was nothing. Thrixel sat in the darkness and watched the stars and tried to understand what he had witnessed. But understanding would not come. Some things were beyond understanding. Some things could only be feared. The stalwart Hope limped toward the nearest space station for repairs. The battle had damaged many systems. The crew worked day and night to keep the ship flying. They were tired and hurt, but they never stopped working. Thrixel spent his final days aboard the ship writing his report for the Valoran High Council. It was the most important document he had ever created. It would be classified at the highest level. Its contents would never be released to the public. He wrote slowly, choosing each word with care. The humans are not what we believe them to be. They are not fragile. They are not weak. They are not a young species in need of guidance from their elders. They are something far more dangerous than anything we have encountered before. He paused and looked out the window at the passing stars. Then he continued. Their bodies are designed for violence. Their bones are dense and hard to break. Their muscles can produce enormous force when necessary. They can function through pain that would stop any other creature. They can survive injuries that should kill them instantly. They can, when properly motivated, exceed every physical limit we believed they possessed. He thought about Jake Dunn, fighting with his chest torn open. He thought about Katie Park, operating that emergency crank in freezing temperatures. He thought about Maria Santos, laughing as she broke Cathari bones with her bare hands. But the most frightening thing about humans is not their strength. It is their ignorance of that strength. He wrote about the handshake that had almost crushed his fingers. He wrote about Danny Vega lifting a 40-calic trunk with one hand. He wrote about the casual way humans spoke of their own impossible achievements. They build their ships with safety systems designed for species far more fragile than themselves. They train their soldiers to show restraint because they genuinely do not understand how much damage they can cause. They shake hands gently because they know, on some deep level, that they could crush bones if they were not careful. He wrote about the stories Ben Cortez had told him. Mothers lifting vehicles off their children. Soldiers fighting with fatal wounds. Explorers crossing impossible distances through deadly environments. They have been holding back their entire existence. Every action they take is limited by their own beliefs about what is possible. Every moment of every day, they restrain themselves without knowing they are doing it. He thought about Captain Monroe tackling the Cathari leader through that airlock door. The impact should have killed her. It should have shattered every bone in her body. But she had stood up afterward like it was nothing. And they do not even realize it. He sat back and read what he had written. It was all true, but it did not capture the full horror of what he had learned. He tried again. My recommendation to the High Council is as follows. Do not antagonize the humans. Do not threaten them. Do not give them any reason to stop holding back. Because if humanity ever truly awakens, if they ever fully understand what they are capable of, there will be nothing in this galaxy that can stop them. He added one final paragraph. They are not a young species finding their place among the stars. They are apex predators who have convinced themselves they are harmless. And that delusion is the only thing keeping the rest of us safe. He encrypted the message and sent it to Valoran. Then he deleted every copy from his personal files. Some knowledge was too dangerous to keep. On his last day aboard the Starward Hope, Captain Lisa Monroe found him in the observation deck. He was staring out at the stars, trying to memorize the view. "You okay?" she asked. Her arm was in a healing cast, but she moved like nothing was wrong. "You've seemed a little off since the attack." Thrixel turned to look at her. This small, soft-looking creature who had killed a Cathari warlord with her bare hands and then asked for a status report. This gentle woman who had crushed his fingers by accident and apologized like she had stepped on his foot. "I am well, Captain," he said carefully. "I have simply learned a great deal during my time here." Monroe smiled warmly, the same smile she had worn when she greeted him on his first day. "I hope it was a good experience. We tried to make you feel welcome." Welcome? She had no idea. No idea what she was. No idea what her species could do. No idea that she had terrified him more than anything in his entire life. It was educational, Thrixel said. Most educational indeed. She walked him to the docking bay the next morning. The whole crew had gathered to say goodbye. Danny Vega shook his hand gently this time. Katie Park gave him a small wave. Maria Santos nodded with respect. Even Jake Dunn was there, still wrapped in bandages, smiling like he had not been at death's door a week ago. They were so friendly, so kind, so completely unaware of what they were. Thrixol boarded his shuttle and watched through the window as the Starward Hope grew smaller in the distance. He watched until he could no longer see it among the stars. Then he closed his eyes and thought about the future. Humanity would keep spreading through the galaxy. They would make allies and enemies. They would face challenges and overcome them. They would keep pushing against their limits, finding new things they could do, becoming more and more powerful. And someday, something would push them too far. Someday, a threat would come that forced humanity to stop holding back. A danger so great that they would have to use every bit of strength they possessed. An enemy so terrible that they would finally wake up and remember what they truly were. Thrixol did not know what would happen on that day. He only knew that he did not want to be anywhere nearby when it arrived. He arrived home a week later. The High Council read his report in silence. When they finished, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, the oldest member of the council, a woman who had lived through 3 wars and 2 plagues, looked up at Thrixol with ancient eyes. "What do you recommend we do?" she asked. Thrixol thought about Captain Monroe and her warm smile. He thought about Danny Vega and his casual strength. He thought about all the kind, friendly humans who had treated him like a guest in their home. "Be their friends," he said simply. "Be good friends. Be the best friends they have ever had. And pray to every god who will listen that they never have a reason to stop being ours." The council agreed. Years later, when the alliance between Valoran and humanity had grown strong, Thrixol sometimes thought about his time on the Starward Hope. He thought about the stories he had heard and the things he had seen. He thought about the sleeping giants who walked among the stars without knowing their own power. Humans were not to be feared for what they were. They were to be feared for what they did. Not know they could become Dot, and that, more than anything else, was what made them the most frightening species in the galaxy. Not their strength, their ignorance of it. Because a creature that knows its limits can be measured and predicted and planned against. But a creature that does not know its limits? That creature could do anything, and might. Thrixol never forgot this lesson. He made sure the Valoran never forgot it. Either be friends with the humans, be very good friends, and never, ever make them remember what they really are.